Good evening. The Green Party's had a good run in the polls lately, but how relevant are they in Christchurch? Tonight, co-leaders Dr. Russell Norman and Materia Ture are my guests, and Lynched starts right now. Greens co-leaders Dr. Russell Norman and Materia Ture shortly, but first, this week's memo to Christchurch. So proposed rules to revitalise Christchurch's so-called CBD are too late. It's as simple as that, isn't it? The city's draft plan review proposes limiting new office, retail and hospitality buildings in fringe areas of the city. The motive behind this is to spark development in the central city. It's a nice idea, to be fair, but it's about 2 years too late. The government's bloated bureaucracy known as SERA and its wisdom locked out development of the CBD for so long that companies had no choice but to move elsewhere. If the council seriously thinks they're going to rush back into the central city, it's wrong, and deep down it knows it. Light industrial suburb Middleton, for example, has many new purpose-built buildings popping up all over the place, including the radio network. These buildings are functional and work just fine, and there's a great vibe in the area too, I must say. But to be fair, News Talk ZB once thrived in downtown Christchurch, but the ring-fenced approach by SERA meant the company had little alternative but to move to Midas Place. The premises there are fantastic, the lease is long-term, and the business continues to be a complete success. The truth is, it never needed the CBD to survive. A drive down Lincoln Road, Blenheim Road, or even more House Ave illustrates superb, intelligent development. Why the council would want to halt this kind of development is beyond me. And property investor and former director of Harcourt, Stephen Collings, told News Talk ZB late last week, it's a little too late in the game for the new rules to have much of an impact at all. He says it's like trying to close the stable doors when the horse is already bolted. And he's right. That's this week's Memo to Christchurch. More on this at the end of the program. But to tonight's guests now. The Green Party appears to be making all the right noises at the moment, much to Labour's frustration. Even the government likes to poke fun at the expense of Labour, often calling the Greens the real opposition. But how relevant are they in our city? Co-leaders Dr. Russell Norman and Materia Ture join me now. Good morning or good evening to you both.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Well, how relevant are you in Christchurch right now?
We know that we have great support in Christchurch, and we're very grateful for that support over a number of elections. Our MPs, Eugenie Sage and Mojo Mathers and Kennedy Graham, who was here for many years, have all put in hundreds of hours of work into Christchurch, particularly since the earthquake. So we know that we have a presence on the ground. We also know that there's always more to do.
Is it a big enough presence though, Dr. Russell Norman? I mean, you came third in the Christchurch by-election. Not a bad result, to be fair too, I might add.
Well, we'd always like more. Obviously the Greens do very well in Christchurch, but we're always seeking more support, and so we'll certainly push for that. But I mean, if you think about, a lot of the issues that are facing Christchurch are around the democratic deficit and the way that the government is effectively acting as like a commissar, so, telling Christchurch what they have to do rather than acting as genuine partners. I mean, the Greens are the ones who have repeatedly spoken out about democracy for Christchurch and for Canterbury, and about the right of the people in Christchurch to have a say, a real say, in the rebuild process.
Do they have a real say at the moment?
No, I mean, if you look at it at the moment, it's pretty much one-way traffic. So central government and Brownlee and basically tell people what they've got to do. We think that there should be a real partnership. So before major decisions are made, I think that it needs to be both an agreement from central government, who clearly are part of the process, but the people of Christchurch and their representatives need to be part of it as well.
In your view then, Materia, why don't we have a partnership at the moment then? What has failed?
I think that this government simply doesn't listen, and they have never listened. I mean, this is a government that took from Cantabrians their regional council, their elected representatives, and their right to continue to vote for their own representatives on a regional body. this is a government that really has its own plan, and it will play that plan out regardless of what the people actually want. And that was exactly what your memo to Christchurch was in the introduction, that there is a plan by central government and they will make the noises about engaging with the community, but they aren't actually listening.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because, I mean, in some respects I do agree with you, but at the same time though, National is rating so well in the polls. Do you think it is possibly a different story in Christchurch?
I do. I mean, I think that this is what the way I see it is that Christchurch is kind of ahead of the curve in terms of the disenchantment with central government and particularly the Prime Minister. They've seen a lot of the Prime Minister, the people in Christchurch, and I think they've been exposed to his promises, and then now they've seen that he hasn't delivered. So I think that the people of Christchurch are probably ahead of the people of New Zealand in understanding the real lack of content.
In your view, what hasn't the Prime Minister delivered on for the people of Christchurch then? Because it's quite a strong thing to suggest.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the Share an Idea, it was all about a greener city, I mean, in many respects. And that really has been undermined consistently by central government, which hasn't come to the table and obviously don't have a lot of comfort with the idea of a greener city. And so that vision, I think, has been fundamentally corroded by central government. That isn't to say that central government hasn't got a lot of things right. Of course they have. And there's a lot of, well-intentioned people there. But here we are, a long way down the track. The greener city isn't really being delivered on, and of course the CBD is still in a lot of trouble.
You guys took a tour of the CBD today. What was your initial reaction? What do you think? There
is still so much destruction. And that is really disheartening to see, and it's really difficult to see that. There is some of the places that have been new and rebuilt have been really look amazing and quite fantastic, but you can see the real struggle to get movement on that. One of the good things I thought when I was looking around was the public art, that there is this community engagement in the CBD. There's an investment by the community in the CBD in this really creative and very responsive and sensitive way, but there doesn't seem to be, there's not the same response from the central government, for example.
It's interesting you say that, actually. You're quite right, because there is a lovely community feeling here in Christchurch, particularly in the suburb areas of this city, where you're right, they're doing little things to try and make themselves feel good. But you would have thought in some respects that's the responsibility of the council and the government. But what I find remarkable is we have a ring-fenced area and nothing's happening, and all the private investment is going down Lincoln Road, it's going down Morehouse Ave, it's going down many places down Addington. Why is that? Why, in your view, has Sarah failed?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I mean, I would go back to fundamentally they didn't see it as a partnership, and I think that was really at the heart of it. Like, so, let 1,000 flowers bloom. There was a lot of initiative and creativity coming out of the private sector that I think could have made a big difference inside the CBD, but essentially it's been kept out by this kind of state-controlled plan. And I'm all for planning, but clearly they've overdone it and they've pushed out the kind of private sector creativity.
We need to take a break. When we return, I want to discuss the residential rebuild in Christchurch. Is it actually happening? That's next on Lynched on CTV. You're back with Lynched on CTV. Dr. Russell Norman, let's talk about the actual rebuild of Christchurch. On your website it says, and I quote, "The people of Christchurch have spoken, let's build a city that protects the environment." What are you actually on about?
Well, we're talking about things like better public transport, walking and cycling, which is all about climate change, which is about the environment, but it's also about a livable city. I'm also real keen on structural timber, the use of structural timber. It's one of my big things.
Yes, I know.
So instead of concrete and steel and kind of tilt slab buildings, we could build beautiful structural timber buildings. The technology's developed right here in Christchurch at Canterbury University, so we've been obviously big fans of that. But it's also, it's also about making sure that the green spaces are protected so that, it's a garden city. So I think there's a lot to it, but central government has so far, I think, struggled.
But, I mean, look, there's a bigger picture here. It's housing, though. We have a housing crisis in the city. Maturia Ture, I was surprised when I looked at your website. Housing doesn't come up as the #1 priority in Christchurch. It is, though.
I think it is one of the priorities. There's a lot of issues here. So we have put out plans, for example, for not only for government to be more involved in building homes in Christchurch and around the country, but making it easier for people to own their own home. but also for there to be better security for tenants. And rentals are a really big issue here in Christchurch at the moment. There's issues around price gouging, the quality of rentals. We have put out plans and proposals that would help fix that, both in the short and in the medium
Let's
term.
just discuss some of those, because I want to pick you up on Christchurch is internationally rated as severely unaffordable, with the housing at nearly 6 times the annual household earnings. Normal markets are below or at about 3.0 times. How do we change that then? Because the issue is affordability. We don't have affordability housing, not just in Christchurch, but perhaps most of the country, Auckland.
Well, that's right. So there was a housing crisis before the earthquakes, and it has only worsened as a result, and families are really struggling, really suffering here. So the big issue is supply. We have to make sure we continue with the supply of housing.
How do we do that, though?
Well, that is the issue for both the private sector, who are good at supplying in some parts of the market, but not in the affordable end of the market. What we have is a gap with affordable housing, and that is why we've said the state needs to be much more involved in that. Housing is infrastructure. It is not just a private issue. It is a piece of infrastructure that a whole community, a whole society needs.
So in order to make affordable housing, you're saying, right, the private sector won't do it, the government has to essentially step in.
The government has to step in and to work with the community and with the private sector to build affordable homes.
It sounds well intended, but how are we supposed to pay for it as taxpayers? Can't you just imagine people saying, oh, this sounds good in theory, but where are we going to get the money from? Are we going to have to borrow?
Well, I mean, there's going to have to be some borrowing. There already is borrowing for infrastructure projects. This is another infrastructure project. So, yes, there is going to be, it's a long-term investment, and so it should be. The suburbs of this country were built by the state to build housing for working people, for middle-class people, so they could build good, strong communities and have families that had security. We need to go back to that, because that is an important value that we've lost.
Dr. Russell Norman, you often talk about creating a compact city. What do you mean by that, and why do we need a compact city?
Well, I mean, what it's about is saying, particularly the central part of the city, is about creating high-quality, medium-density housing. So that's high quality in the sense of being energy efficient. It's about it being sufficient size, so not pokey little apartments, but reasonable size apartments. And it's also making sure about the noise, because that's obviously an issue as well. We know that you can build high quality, medium density housing. It's done in many places. And I think part of where we're going as a country is that we're going to see more development of high quality, medium density rather than urban sprawl.
The council is going to have to put in some pretty tight regulations to ensure we're not living in Chinese shoeboxes, aren't they then? So we don't have the situation like we have in Auckland, where there are many apartments there now, but they're almost becoming the slums of Calcutta in a way. They look dreadful, and they are dreadful, aren't they?
And some of them are, and some of them are great. And some of it's also about we've got to ease some regulations as well. So parking regulations, for example, drives up the price of apartments when you've got to provide so many parks per apartment and all the rest of it. So it's about getting the regulations right, which sometimes means making sure you protect quality, but sometimes means that you don't waste lots of money on ensuring that you have levels and levels of parking in there as well. So it's about getting it right.
Is the Christchurch City Council, though, doing us all injustice by not opening up more land around Christchurch? You guys are essentially anti-sprawl, aren't you? You don't think that's the way forward. You prefer, to be fair, everybody living in not compact, but a compact city. You don't want urban development out in the sprawl areas of Christchurch, do you?
It's about putting the prices where they actually fall rather than subsidising. So sprawl has to be subsidised, so you've got to subsidise all the infrastructure to get it out there.
Well, the developers will probably want to do that, won't they?
Well, it requires, the councils and the taxpayers end up subsidising it. So whereas compact urban form, high quality compact urban form, just puts less pressure on infrastructure.
It's also less costs on families, because one of the issues around sprawl is that the further out you go, the more it costs to get to town, to school, to work. So the costs then are borne by the families and by the community as a whole, and those costs are too high. If we have alternatives.
I know what you're saying, but then again, in areas like Waimakariri and Selwyn districts, the outskirts of Christchurch, they are going gangbusters at the moment. People are choosing to live more out, if you want to call it the wop-wops, than ever before. If that's their choice, why not allow them to do so? Would you really want to regulate and have a compact city and say, no, I don't want you going out to rural Christchurch?
I don't think we have a problem with people already developing out on the outskirts. It's already happening. The question really is, how do we build the quality in terms of the compact urban form? Because that's kind of the piece of the puzzle that's missing. We've got plenty of sprawl already, and it's going to, obviously there's under development, but the question is, how do you build compact urban form so that you make sure that the CBD is a great place to live, and people from all different income brackets can afford to live there, and there's lots of good green space. It's all possible.
But why do we need to make the CBD an amazing place to live, though? Why are we so obsessed with creating a CBD that's so livable?
Because we know that livable CBDs are great creative communities. So if you look for, I'm very
They're also a thriving hub for crime, though, aren't they?
No. So if you look at innovative, innovation is one of the key issues for the New Zealand economy. Where do you get innovation from? You get it from large urban centres, are the key drivers of innovation, both in New Zealand but internationally in particular. And so we want to have great cities if we want to have a great economy. That's simply more than just dairy and meat and raw logs. If we're going to drive innovation out of the New Zealand economy, great cities are part of the solution around innovation.
I want to talk to you about what Bill English said in Parliament recently. He denies demand for non-residential or resident investors as a major cause of the so-called housing price inflation in this country. He argues that, that your anti-sprawl policies are really to blame. Effectively, the councils that strangulate the land supply and that forces the price up in the middle. Is he on the money with that?
No. So if you look at the housing market demand and supply, so on the demand side, we know that offshore demand is a very significant part of the market, at least 12% in Auckland, no doubt probably a lot higher than that.
How do we know that though? Where's the data though?
The data, all we have is the kind of survey of real estate agents who are almost certainly under-reporting the level of offshore demand because it's not in their interest to report the true level of offshore demand. So in other countries like Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, they place constraints around offshore buyers in order to not drive housing out of the price of ordinary people who are living in their country. So we want citizens and permanent residents who call New Zealand home to be able to afford housing here, and that means placing some constraints on the offshore demand.
You see, the data's not there though to suggest there really is a problem with overseas people coming in and buying up property. Or is it? When you look at websites like Barfoot and Thompson in Auckland, for example, they're all Asian real estate agents. That's not racist, that's a fact, isn't it?
Well, they're also advertising. I mean, there's significant advertising of New Zealand properties overseas. So we know that there is a real interest and a market overseas. And we also know from the information that we have that there is a demand. It's a significant, even if it's low and underreported, it is very significant. So we have to do something to make sure that families can get access to decent housing. We've had a significant reduction in home ownership in the last 13 years. We've gone from 55% home ownership to about 43%. Yeah, it's very, very low. We've had a massive increase in rentals.
But this still comes back to how to make homes affordable.
Yes. Which is partly driven by two things. One, by the offshore demand doesn't help, but also we have too few homes in this country. There's been reports that have shown we've had at least 70,000 too few homes for the existing population. We know our population is growing and we're still not meeting the demand. So there has to be some intervention at the affordable home building kind of area gap, and that is where the state can do some good work.
Quickly, you supportive of the Kiwi Build plan by Labor? Is that one option?
That's one option.
It's a nice option though, but where are we going to get the tradies from? We don't have builders as it is at the moment.
We have to keep building the industry. I mean, that's the whole point. You invest in your people, you invest in your workforce, and they can meet the demand.
We need to take a break. Coming up, your feedback on commercial development in Christchurch, some final comments on the Council's draft district plan and what it could mean for businesses in this city. Stay with us. Welcome back. Greens co-leader Dr Russell Norman and Materia Ture are my guests. Let's talk about Mr Kim.com. What is with this internet party, and do you see the internet party as a potential threat because you're pretty much overrepresented in the youth market, aren't you?
I see it more as a distraction, to be honest. I mean, for the Greens, we're focused on the big issues facing New Zealanders, like some of the stuff we've been talking about today, and I see the internet party as a bit of a distraction.
A serious distraction though? I mean, there's a potential they could take a couple of thousand votes and that could completely change the election, couldn't it?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's unlikely though. I don't think they're going to get very far.
Really?
Yeah.
What about this whole thing on the app where they've got the app things going on for membership? Is that something the Greens should get into? I mean,
yeah, there's a lot of businesses have launched apps in their time. It doesn't mean they've become Google, you know.
Didn't you go to his mansion and trying to stop him? Or what was the deal with
my
that?
advice to him was that it wasn't a useful thing to do, but you know, he's gone ahead. It's a democracy. He can.
Why did you say? So you must have been a little bit worried then if you went to his house.
Well, I just think.
Did you go to his mansion?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I
nice
just.
place?
Well, yeah, it's a
He
mansion.
still got butlers?
Well, I don't know.
Well, you went to his house.
Well, there weren't any butlers while I was there, but maybe he had them hidden out the back. I don't know.
Did you go?
No, I did not.
In all seriousness,
I'm quite pleased about it.
are you? But in all seriousness, no, you must have been slightly worried then to even go to the Coatesville mansion and say, buddy, can you just laugh a little bit?
I think the issue here is, you know, we've got our project as the Green Party is to change the government. This government is enormously destructive. They've caused a huge amount of harm to families all over the country, Christchurch included, and so they have to be gotten rid of.
The polls, I mean,
well, actually,
the
polls are showing that National and a Green Labour agreement are running about neck and neck. So, you know, the Greens, we know that we're improving on our poll ratings. We're really pleased about that work. If we stick to the issues that people are most concerned about, and that is not the Internet Party.
Give me the number one issue for the Greens in terms of Christchurch.
I'd say it's about partnership. It's about the relationship between central government and Christchurch, and I think that can be fixed, but we need a new government.
That sounds woofy.
Well,
I thought you were going to say housing, to be honest.
Well, it is housing, but it's more than that. It's about the rebuild of the city and the role of the people that live here in controlling that rebuild.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. You're going to put somebody up in the Christchurch Central seat against Nikki Wagner and Tony Milne?
Yeah, we'll be selecting.
Who's that person?
We haven't selected them yet. The boundaries are still to be completely sorted out here, so we'll let you know as soon as it's done.
Good. Matiria Ture and Dr. Russell Norman, appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Thanks for coming on Lynched. Feedback time now. First of all, thank you so much for all your feedback coming in on Facebook. Don't forget you can always have your say there, facebook.com/lynchnz. This time I asked you whether you supported Labour's new bill, which would essentially force landlords to insulate their homes for tenants despite the possible costs involved. Gee, they need to do this, don't they? That is for sure. Stacey Watt says, as a parent of a child where the cold can actually kill her, yes, it's a good thing. But as someone paying nearly 98% of my wages on rent alone, it scares me. Tracy Keane says rents are already going up. We're on our second increase in just over a year now. I'm happy our landlady has finally fixed our leaky roof and is planning on replacing the dodgy French doors in our kitchen, but I'd really love better insulation and a heat pump that doesn't cost the earth to use. Adele writes, it's a great move, but unfortunately it will mean rent will go up. We wouldn't need this type of policy if landlords maintain their properties to a high standard. Yes, even someone on the benefit deserves to live in a warm, dry home. And Munty Valentine, who I think that's the real name actually too, says, I'm serious, says this should only apply to landlords who rent properties for a living. The market is largely made up of individuals relocating and needing to rent their own home for a short time. If we make it too difficult, those rentals wouldn't be on the market and the law of supply and demand would probably push up the prices. I'm not sure I agree with that, but thanks so much for your feedback. Well, finally tonight, back to the damn old CBD, eh? Look, I love the idea of a CBD, I really do. There are some sensational developments like Anthony Goff's project, but let's get real. Shopping malls forced the death of the CBD in Christchurch even before the earthquake, so perhaps planners have to get over the so-called concept of the beating heart philosophy. It wasn't working before the earthquakes, and the whole concept of build and they will come is complete and utter rubbish. Build an oversized sports stadium propped up by taxpayers for private businesses, and who will come? Perhaps angry residents picketing at the increased rates for white elephants, that's who, so get over yourselves. Many said the city would fail without a CBD, but guess what? Christchurch keeps chugging along. Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell even accepts the horse has bolted and said as much on News Talk ZB last week. But she says district plans only seeks to stop commercial activity in light industrial areas. Well, that's been happening for over 3 years now. You're out of time. And the landscape in this city has changed, and I believe for the better. These proposed rules fail to address the real problem. The commercial rebuild is a success only because Sarah couldn't interfere. The council needs to look at incentives to businesses instead of producing more regulation to prop up an experimental government Disneyland project, because that's what all it is. Sarah often claims the CBD development is stalled because of insurance issues, but why has Victoria Street taken off? What about Lincoln Road, for example? That's starting to look like the new CBD. And what about the new buildings on Morehouse Ave? No issues there. Sarah could actually take some notes from the private sector on how to get things done. Rules need to be in place following natural disasters, but I do worry that the city should have been allowed to grow more organically. More regulation will only frustrate already frustrated business owners. And that's this week's show. Good night.